Folks, I'm going to go out on a limb here today, and I want to try and explain to you, or describe to you an experience I had a number of years ago. And it's up to you whether you want to believe me or not. I take St. Bernadette's line from Lourdes very seriously, where she said, "I have come to inform, not to convince." So it's up to yourselves whether you want to believe me or not, but this is true. And bear with me, there's a reason why I'm going to try and describe this to you today. I started seminary in 2011, all right? I began in Maynooth. And when you go there for the first year, after a few days, the first year seminarians, we go to, say, Roscrea or some monastery for a couple of days retreat, just to get our bearings in many respects, and to calm down after making such a big leap in many respects. So one night, myself and 4 other seminarians, we were just saying the rosary in a small little oratory in the second floor of the monastery. And it's a very small little room, small enough. It had carpets like many of the oratories do, and it had the tabernacle about eye length or eye level. And there was a few little lights just kind of keeping the light in the room going, and just a little flicker from the sanctuary lamp beside the tabernacle. And when we suddenly finished saying the rosary, 2 of the fellas got up and left and went back to the rooms because it was getting quite late, about 12:30, 1 o'clock at night. But myself and another guy, we just stood there and we didn't say a thing. We just sat there in complete silence. I mean, it was dark outside, but there wasn't a sound of anything. And then, suddenly, I became very aware of the room starting to fill up. There was a very heavy but an awesome presence started to fill up the room. And my eyes, folks, they were open the way I'm looking at you here now. But I began to see the windows in the oratory starting to expand. A bit like, I don't know, like Dr. Strange or something like that, you know, like a matrix or something. The windows started to expand in the room. And it's like, say, a big gush of water came into a container and it was struggling to hold the weight and the pressure of the water. It was something like that, right? And then the room became filled with a golden orange kind of hue, kind of a light, a golden orange light. And at that stage, the hairs on the back of my neck, they went straight up as to wood. And my heart started to beat extraordinarily fast. Never forgot it. And suddenly, I became so convincingly aware that I was in the presence of God the Father, particularly God the Father, for whatever reason. And folks, all I could do, because I felt that size, it was such an awesome presence in the room, I straight away fell down to my knees. That's all I could do, in complete awe and silence. It was quite a frightening experience in many respects. And then I began to see the doors of the tabernacle open up slightly, just slowly open up, and I could see the Eucharist. And then I could see like a waterfall of fire coming out of the Eucharist down to the floor, splashing like a waterfall and engulfing the entire room, like liquid fire. And it came all around me, the whole shebang. It was extraordinary. And I was very clear on what that was. It was God's love wrapping me around, just completely enveloped me. It happened for a couple of seconds, and it went just like that. That was it. Like I said, folks, my eyes were open, but I could see this taking place. So I don't know what you make of that. I don't understand it myself. But my God, did I feel that size. I felt so unworthy to be in such a presence like that. And folks, when I received my first Holy Communion, I was also quite aware that when I was a child, receiving that little white host was something very special. I didn't understand why or how Jesus was present in the Eucharist, but I completely believed it as a child. And I'll never forget that first time I received the Holy Communion as a child, my first Holy Communion, the interior feeling of warmth and love from God was just amazing, and it has never left me. And in many respects, is one of the reasons why I was pulled into priesthood, I suppose, in a way. And even like, I started here back, 5 years now, this year I've been here. And one of the first things I did was create a little oratory in my house across the way there. And just a little tabernacle, little altar where I say Mass when I'm not on Mass during the week. And I have adoration almost every night, whenever I'm there. And there's times, folks, throughout the last couple of years, Christ has made himself very, very present through the Eucharist. An extraordinary warmth of his love. And at times I have to say to Jesus, stop. It's too much for me. My heart and body can only take so much. His presence is so overwhelming at times and awesome. But they're dramatic moments, folks, of my life, and there's many, many more. And it very rarely happens, but it does happen. Okay? Folks, I think there's a lot of people in this country who have great faith in God, and they're terrified to speak about their experiences of God in their life. Those moments where they're so sure of God's presence actively in their lives. Because there's many reasons for that. One, the church through the 70s, the 80s, and up to the 90s, we over-psychoanalyzed our faith to the detriment of it in many respects. And B, you and I are living in a society where culture does everything it can to stamp out anyone talking about the transcendent, of God being a real person in people's lives. And we see at the moment there's a relentless rush to looking for referendums like there's no tomorrow, to get rid of God language out of our constitution. We don't want that. That's archaic nonsense. Get rid of it. You know, it's the same people the whole time advocating for this stuff. Guys, we need to wake up. We can't be afraid to talk about God in our lives anymore. The time is coming where it's very clearly cut what decision and route you're going to take with this. And look, folks, it's hard for me not to share those encounters I said a few moments ago that I had with the Lord, because our readings today, they're unashamed in talking about Isaiah's vision of God, Peter's encounter with Christ the first time. You know? I mean, a lot of you know I smoke the pipe. I often go for a stroll around the road with a puff in the pipe, or outside the church or outside the house. And I do have the most brilliant of conversations with people that never come to the church, but we have a great laugh and a great old chat about all sorts of things. And it's quite interesting. A couple of people have told me of their own experiences when they received their first Holy Communion, in particular, as a child. They too felt that warm embrace of Christ in their lives. Very simple, very quick, but it never left them. And in many ways, it kept them going in their faith for years, right up into their 80s and 90s. Extraordinary. It's amazing. Beautiful moments, folks, where God's presence is very real and very loving, but very awesome as well at the same time. And I know plenty of other Christians who had extraordinary encounters, far more amazing and fantastic than mine alone, but it has supported them in their lives of faith. But folks, I'm saying that God's presence in our lives is very, very important. All right? As you know, we've had about the bones of 80 First Holy Communions and confirmations last year in our parishes. A combination of 2 years of classes for the sacraments, right? And I noticed, folks, that a number of children, particularly those that came forward for confirmation, they said something similar. They started to grumble, or, they were getting annoyed that they didn't experience anything when we placed the holy oils in their foreheads. They didn't feel anything. It's all a lot of, at the end of the day type of thing. In fact, one young lady who came up to me, and just as I was about to put the oils in her forehead for confirmation, she asked me a question. She said, "Father, will this ruin my makeup?" That's what she said to me. That was her most pressing concern. And I said, "Yeah, it is." So I gave her an extra dollop of oil. But it gives us some indication, folks, of where they're coming at from this. And that's, all of that, what I'm talking about there, is the perfect example of cultural Catholicism alive and well in this country. This entitlement. Because I'm in second class or sixth class, I'm entitled to get my confirmation, without any serious spiritual preparation beforehand. It's a conveyor belt type of thing. Folks, it's important because our readings today, everybody, talk about the invasion of God's grace into our lives. When we're open to God, by God does He rush in like there's no tomorrow. Isaiah and Peter, powerful examples, of their extraordinary encounters with God in their lives. Both of them, including Paul in our second reading, in their closeness to God, they become very, very aware of their own imperfectness. Like when I had that experience, I felt that size. I all I could do was drop to my knees in awe and in silence. It was such an overwhelming experience. See, everybody, God is pure light, pure love, pure holiness, pure beauty. Okay? And when we have an experience in our lives of encountering God in a very real way, logically, our own imperfectness, our lack of love, our lack of compassion, our lack of holiness is going to become more prevalent. I mean, what is it Isaiah says in the first reading? I'm doomed, he says, when he sees God in such a vision. He's so aware of his imperfectness. Peter, the same thing. He gets down on the ground and says, leave me, Lord, I'm a sinful man. Such is the beauty and the awesome in God's presence. And look, folks, this is the issue why some of our young people and families today who step forward for First Holy Communion and confirmations, they don't have that basic but very fundamental experience of God's love and presence in their lives. Simple, very important. Like, folks, don't get me wrong here. I'm not talking about having visions and ecstasies and all these type of things like there's no tomorrow every day. That's not what I'm talking about. But there should be, folks, because we can't trust everything we see and feel, because the enemy is extremely crafty when it comes to this too. We have to discern. But we should at least encounter God in a very real way at least once in our life. At least once. Simple, but beautiful, but something we never ever forget. All right? And that leaves us no doubt in his existence. We might doubt it later on, but it stays with us. See, everybody, it's sin. Sin blocks us from seeing God in us and around us. All right? It blocks us from experiencing his loving embrace and his presence. Because God makes us a visit to us the whole time. Every day, we can't see him. Under the guise of bread, wine, the words of the Holy Scriptures on the page, the loving actions and words of a good man, a good woman, the blessing prayer of a grandparent, so many other things, all examples of God's presence in our lives. Most people don't see this. They don't experience God in these things because they're not ready for it. They're not ready for it. Our lives, our souls are tainted with so much sin nowadays, folks, that we've lost a sense of it, of how it can really impact us, our hearts, our minds, and our souls. It does enormous damage to our souls. It slowly cuts us off from seeing God. Sin corrupts the heart, everybody. What is it Jesus says in the Beatitudes? Blessed are the pure in heart, they will see God. That's what he's talking about. It's why saints, for example, have these such dramatic experiences of God in their lives, right? Their presence. They allow God to invade their lives, and by God do their lives change forever. Their minds and hearts are clean. They do their best not to sin. Yeah, I did this in the past, yeah, but I can change with God's help. And now look at the world is changing before me, and I'm helping that. Amazing. Holiness is the call of our time, folks. Holiness. I mean, those who come forward for First Holy Communions and confirmations, they don't have basic experience of God in their lives because they're not ready for it. Preparation is not complete. The school or intellectual faith is one thing, but there's far more to it than just that. Religion or faith in Christ is not a religious subject. It's a way of life. Most of them don't pray as families anymore, let alone come to Mass either once a month, maybe at Christmas. That's it. So how can they expect or to be entitled to experience God's moment of touching their hearts with his finger in those moments to receive the holy aisles or First Holy Communion when they're not prepared for it, when they don't know what it is they're accepting? It's very basic, and it's logic at the end of the day. I mean, folks, even for any of us here today, including myself in this, why don't we experience God's loving touch in our hearts when we receive him in the Eucharist at Mass? At least now and again. When's the last time you went to confession? To scrub the heart of sin, to get rid of what keeps us awake at night. Give it over to Christ. Give it over to the Lord. He's the only one, the only sponge that can absorb this darkness and sin out of our lives. Nothing else, no one else can. It's not a joke, everybody. We're slowly eradicating from experiencing God in our lives because of habitual sin, stuff we're doing we shouldn't be doing again and again and again. We're doing any form of building a wall against it. Putting up some defense at least. No prayer. We're wide open to all sorts of influences. And when we can't see or can't experience God, what happens? We shrug our shoulders. Oh, he mustn't be real then. Forget about it. No point in going to Mass. No point in prayer in life. No point in going back to Mass at all. Things like that. My invitation today, folks, is to asking you, it's up to yourself want to do this now, but it's important. Begin to examine your life a little bit. just slow down. Pray and examine your life. What is it in your life that you know you're doing that you know you shouldn't be really doing? And don't hold on to that. Go to confession. All right? Invite God's grace into your lives, folks. Then come to me, a priest. Help me to help you get rid of that sin out of your hearts and your minds. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychologist, but I am a priest for Christ, first and foremost. That's the only way I can help people, is as a priest. I'm not a social worker, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a doctor, a priest. That's all. Nothing more, nothing less. And I'll help you to begin again in your life, to let God's grace invade your life and let Him change what needs to be changed. And then you'll get a chance to experience His beautiful and dramatic presence every now and again. And that's when you're going to know just how much you're loved by God.